So it's good to have you here, and any of you who may watch this recording later on. We are going to tackle a pretty big, challenging, and debated topic here as we get a chance to look at apocalyptic writing and the book of Daniel in particular. But as we get ready to begin, I invite you to open up in your question book to page 31. And let's join in the prayer there. Lord of creation, time, and eternity, we praise you for forgiving, guiding, sustaining, and inspiring us day by day. Above all, we thank you for sending your Son to reveal to us the delusions of this world and the wonder and wisdom of your eternal plan. Inspire us at all times to remember that our eternal brother, Jesus the Messiah, the true Son of Man, walked out of step with the kingdoms of the world all the way to death on a cross. Open our little minds to understand that his cross was his throne, and that you said yes to his servant ministry by raising him from the dead. Grant us the help and inspiration of your Holy Spirit to embrace Jesus as our forgiving Savior and servant Lord, and to bear joyous witness to those who walk in the ways of darkness and doubt. Sustain us in faith in your forgiving grace until our Lord, the Son of Man, comes in the clouds of heaven to welcome us, his blessed ones, into the kingdom prepared for us from the foundation of the world. In his loving, forgiving name. Amen. So as we get ready to review what we looked at the last time, which does set some of the stage for us here, as we'll get into this lesson, open up in page 96 in your text, and we'll look at those three illustrations that are represented here. Somebody can read 37a.
Cyrus of Persia overthrew the Babylonians in 538 BC. Little is known about his successors. The Greeks under Alexander the Great conquered the Persians in 332 BC. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, his realm was divided among his generals. Ptolemy and his successors ruled Egypt.
Seleucus,
thank you. And his successors ruled in the Fertile Crescent. The Ptolemies controlled Palestine until 198 BC, when they lost to the Seleucids. The Seleucid Antiochus IV Epiphanes ruled from 175 to 163 BC. He made strenuous efforts to enforce Hellenism throughout his realm, and resorted to violent measures to stamp out Judaism, which he saw as a hindrance to his dream. In 168 BC, he desecrated the Jerusalem temple and began an organized persecution of the Jews. A revolt broke out under the leadership of the Maccabees. Eventually, under the leadership of Judas Maccabeus, Judas the Hammer, the Maccabees defeated the Syrian forces and cleansed and rededicated the temple in December 165 BC.
All right. So this chart, really what it is, attempts to try and put some names and dates to things. And again, the upper section shows Cyrus coming to power in 538, and then the various rulers that followed him, and kind of what was happening. This is sort of, you might say, what was happening in the wider scene, and this was happening in and around Judah. So when Cyrus came to the throne, he allowed exiles to return back, because both the Assyrians and the Babylonians had a practice of conquering people and then taking the bulk of that population and forcing them to live elsewhere. And so for our purposes, we're interested in what he allowed the Jews to do. So under Sheshbazzar, they returned, they set up the altar. We read some of this in Ezra and Nehemiah some lessons back. They began rebuilding the temple. That came to an end, but then they finally did picked that up again until the temple was rededicated in 515 BC. So you can see that happened during the reign of these. And then Nehemiah and Ezra, again, trying to decide exactly where to place them, are occurring during this time underneath these Persian kings. Meanwhile, a little later on, not an Eastern power, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, all Eastern powers, but the Western power of the Greeks comes. And now it's being dominated from the West. And of course, after the Greeks will come the Romans. But Alexander the Great, as you just read, after he dies, his empire is divided up. One of his successor, Ptolemy, and his successors, who are all known as the Ptolemies, ruled in Egypt and kept control of Judah by and large until 198 BC. But then the Seleucids, they would be Syrians, and the Seleucids and their successors eventually gained control of Judah. And it was under Antiochus IV Epiphanes that the temple was desecrated. He set up an altar to the Olympian god Zeus. Antiochus believed he was Zeus in the flesh, if you will. And so he set up an altar to Zeus, sacrificed a pig on that altar right in the temple precincts. That's when the uprising occurred with the Maccabees, and so then those under Judas and others, the temple was recaptured, rededicated, and then we just see a list of essentially about 100 years of independence from at least foreign powers. But the truth of the matter is that when the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans came to power, they quickly exerted their power, as is often the case. And so the liberator sometimes becomes the new master. And but what then began with both the desire to some embrace Greco-Roman culture, Romans a little early, the Hellenistic culture of Greece, others resisting it. This is this challenge. And of course, we don't get much into this at this point, just to let you know it's coming. But Emperor Pompey will enter Jerusalem. Julius Caesar will be assassinated. And of course, the Caesar Augustus that we know from Linus's retelling of the Christmas story in the Peanuts Christmas special comes to power for a stretch of time. But we have some of these rulers. The most one we're going to be interested in or well known is Herod the Great, because he's the Herod who's alive when Jesus is born. We're not quite there yet, but this is where we are going. Questions on that? Then the next picture, 37b. Nobody wants fun with those names? I'll read it. The history of the Maccabees, Hasmoneans, is complex and brutal. Judas Maccabeus died in battle. His brothers and successors, Jonathan and Simon, were both assassinated. The goal of those who succeeded him was to restore Judah's borders to what they had been during David's day. Alexander Jannaeus assassinated vast numbers of those who opposed him and his rule. His wife, Alexandra Salome, succeeded him and proved a moderate ruler. If you've got a who in there, you can cross that off. That's a typo. However, after her death, her two sons battled each other to gain access to the throne. And then in 63 BC, the Romans took over control of Judah and renamed it Judea, a Roman name. Eventually, in 37 BC, Herod the Great, an Idumean, that is a descendant of Esau, gained access to the throne of Judea and ruled under the watchful eye of his Roman overlords. Herod's second wife was Mariamne, a Hasmonean princess. However, Herod eventually had Mariamne, her two sons by Herod, and her brother Aristobulus put to death. Herod saw all four as power hungry and a threat to his authority. And so then here is this family line with the Hasmoneans. And so there's Mattathias, and his grandfather was Harmonius. That's how they get the Hasmoneans. But Mattathias had 5 sons. We're not worried about 2 of them, but his third son, Judas, takes over after Mattathias started the revolt against Antiochus's forces. When he's killed in battle, his brother Jonathan takes control. When he's killed, assassinated, his brother Simon takes over. And then going down here, Simon's son, John Hyrcanus, takes over next. And you can see now it's starting to be almost dynastic, right? Passed on from father to son. He has a brother, Aristobulus, or excuse me, a son, Aristobulus, who takes control, marries this woman named Alexandria Saloma, or Salome Alexandra. The names can be interchanged in their order, and imprisons his two brothers in the process because they were all struggling to grab hold of the throne and the power. But when he dies, she releases the two brothers from prison, marries the other brother, and rules for some time. After he dies, she will rule, going down below. Then she has a son who will rule for a while, another son that will rule for a while. There's another Alexandra that is a daughter who gets married to and will have two sons named Alexander and Aristobulus. And you can kind of see how the names are repeating, but it's kind of through a bloodline here, but Herod's not part of this bloodline. He marries into it. And so that's what's happening with this picture. Just kind of tracking, and you don't have to worry about remembering all of those names. Finally, 37C.
The Maccabean movement became one motivated by dynastic and territorial ambition. It gave birth to a dynasty in which a ruler served as both high priest and political leader. After Rome rose to power and took over control in the eastern Mediterranean world in 63 BC, Herod the Great ruled Judea, Samaria, Galilee, Perea, and Gaulonitis with Roman sanction from 37 to 4 BC. When Herod died in 4 BC, his remains were interred in the Herodian fortress palace a few miles southeast of Bethlehem, Jesus' birthplace. Those who wish to understand the New Testament fully need to make themselves familiar with the contents of the Old Testament and with the history of the intertestamental period, in particular that of the Maccabees, Hasmoneans, and Herod the Great.
So even if you feel like you have a passing sense of it, we've got a few little bits here. So this is the different territory when Judah is independent for a little while, and then the Hasmoneans begin to expand it, and then it's further expanded almost to the extent of David's realm. And then just this kind of story where you've got Mattathias and his 5 sons, and it just kind of goes from son to son. So you've got Mattathias, Hasmoneus, his 3rd son Judas first becomes the leader. But he's primarily a military leader, but he dies in battle. You got a hammer there because Maccabeus means hammer. Then you've got the 5th son who becomes a high priest and a leader, but not a king. When he is assassinated, the 2nd son is made high priest and a little king. And you've just got these, all these murders and things going on here with Simon. And then John Hyrcanus eventually will take the throne and the high priest role. And it is underneath him that Aristobulus the first, notice the crown gets big. He declares himself to be king and high priest. He puts his mother and 2 brothers in prison, allows his mother to starve to death. The 2 brothers are survive because he'll get married, and Alexander, it just keeps going. So you don't have to remember all of these names, but this is, for example, Alexander Jannaeus. When he takes control, the Pharisees revolt. He crucifies 800 of them. We talked about that last session. And it's just messy as it works its way through Alexander, Salome, Aristobulus, Hyrcanus, and eventually the Romans will be in control, and the Maccabean Empire or power comes to an end, but they still have access to the high priesthood very often. And you'll hear about some of these people as we work our way through the New Testament. Good to go? Yoo-hoo, yoo-hoo. You don't seem very excited. Well, let's start doing easy stuff. Turn, if you will, to pages 98 and referred to as the Old Testament, although the books are in slightly different order. And it's important to note that the book of Daniel is part of the Hebrew writings. And so that's going to be a part of the influence that leads the author to take the position he does. Be aware that with the book of Daniel, there's sort of two ways of understanding Daniel. One is to understand Daniel as being written and about in the time in which the stories are set. And the other is to look at Daniel as a later writing that is using these ancient stories to give a current message to people in a time of persecution. Again, all going back to Antiochus. We'll take this apart a little bit more as we go along. But let's look again, one more time, using a different tool at some of this intertestamental history that we were reviewing from the previous unit, okay? So when Alexander conquers from the west, his empire is massive. It goes all the way to this Greek area and northern Africa, and then keeps going east all the way to the very borders of India. So if you think about a map, this is just a giant, giant area of land. But of course, Alexander won't live to enjoy, quote unquote, ruling over this vast empire because he will die. And when he dies, his empire is chopped up into 4 sections and ruled over by some of his generals. The two we're most interested in are the Ptolemies, who ruled this part in Egypt, and the Seleucids, who ruled this part. They eventually lost this. They had it to start with, but they don't have the manpower to control it. And then why that's interesting, because once again, this little strip of land where Israel is located connects Africa to Asia. And so if you can control this stretch of land, you have powerful influence upon the trade routes that happen back and forth. And so that's why they're always fighting over this little strip of land. Okay. And so the Ptolemies, for a while, rule here, and you can kind of see the green overlaid a little bit. The Seleucids eventually rule here, but they're fighting back and forth, and it will be after 198 BC that the Seleucids finally gain control of this territory. With me so far? And so on page 99, it will talk about that and how there's this battle after Alexander dies in 323 BC, and they're fighting over this, and Seleucus will set up a capital here at Antioch. And by the way, just looking ahead, this is the same Antioch that we will hear in the New Testament called Antioch of Syria. And this is, for example, where Paul and Barnabas will have their headquarters when they get ready to go out and do their missionary journeys. So we'll come back to that place there. But as it points out in 4, 5, 6, and 7, that Antiochus IV Epiphanes, when he came to power, his goal was to Hellenize all of his territory. And of course, to reconquer as much of the territory as possible. You're probably, if not familiar with the term, probably have heard the term, what a megalomaniac is, right? So a megalomaniac is generally referred to as a person who's in power and wants to have as much power and exercise as much power and control over as many people and places and situations as possible. And so they keep trying to get more. And so Seleucus was, or Antiochus IV Epiphanes was that kind of goal. So here you've got these columns. He wants to Hellenize this area. And it was just a quick summary of what we had before, that after he went down to fight in Egypt, he returned, he plundered the Jerusalem temple and began to try, and it became very clear to him that those holding to the classical Jewish faith were not gonna Hellenize like he wanted. And so some of the Jewish people by heritage did. They were very happy to be released from some of those strictures that were there in terms of keeping the law. But those who wanted to continue to keep the law, Pharisees, for example, were persecuted. And the whole practice of the Jewish faith, be it circumcision, sacrifice, reading the scripture, owning copies of any of these kinds of things were considered to be treason. And so that takes us to this midpoint here. Because before we get any further, we need to understand two different kinds of writing styles or writing categories that we find in the scripture. We spent much time prior to the exile looking at what is called the prophetic appeal, because what did the prophets do? They look back to the covenant at Sinai. And so now start thinking of Amos, Hosea, Micah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, these prophets that we read previously. And they look back and notice the covenant is broken. And they're warning the people that if they don't return to the Lord and take the covenant seriously, that the future's in question. And the message of the prophets, at least the pre-exilic prophets, over and over again was repent, right? Turn away from your wicked ways, return to the Lord. Got that? That's we're pretty used to. What we're going to be looking at today is an example of what's called the apocalyptic appeal. And apocalyptic writings are addressed to people who are in bondage. And here's an example I like to use. You're probably familiar with the spiritual song that goes something like this. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I look over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Okay, you know this song. What's it about? What does it sound like it's about? Right? It's a song of the slaves out in the fields, expressing their hope that the day will come when the angels come and take me from the troubles of this life home to the freedom of heaven. But it might be interesting to know that the song had another purpose. It was the song that would be sung when word came that the Underground Railroad was coming near your plantation. And if you wanted to escape, now was your chance. But Massa didn't know that. Massa thought, well, look at these dear slaves singing about Jesus. I like that, you see. Apocalyptic appeal is an appeal to people who are in bondage, to a people who are forced to live in a way that doesn't give them freedom. And so the apocalyptic appeal is this, that God is going to break in to their bondage and set them free and take them into the age to come when the Messiah will be here. And so the message of the apocalyptic writings are stand firm, trust, wait on the Lord. God will deliver you. It's a different kind of writing. And one of the features that's interesting about what's called pseudonymous apocalyptic, and pseudonymous is a pseudonym, right? It's a pen name, it's a different name, is that often, not always, but often, the author is really here in time, but writing as if the author pretended to be back here in time. And so the writer is telling stories about back then that sound like they're stories from back then, but they're really stories that the insiders, that is, the oppressed people, hear the message that's underneath. Does that make sense? So it's a different kind of writing. And when this happens, the past events that are presented as predictions, but they're already have happened, are generally quite accurate, because instead of saying, here's what's coming in the future, you're looking back to say, here's what happened in the past. And meanwhile, in apocalyptic writing, the predictions that they're putting out there in front of you may or may not happen in the way that they are described, because the future is really open. So that's why the apocalyptic writings, the in-between stuff between the time that supposedly the author is writing and is actually writing, it sounds really clear, because writing from here, you know what happened back here. And so this is the sense of this being given. And so it's very often under a pen name, a pseudonym, because if you're captured, right, nobody wants, the overlords are not going to tolerate this kind of stuff. We don't want anybody stirring up trouble. We wipe them out. And so this is a part of what is happening in this picture. And it's important to understand. Got it? So before we jump to the next picture, if you turn to pages 102 and 103, here is, for example, a made-up story by the author of these materials. He says, you live on an island in a troubled part of the world. The island is small and has a population of about 1,000 people. All are Christians and hold membership in one church located in the center of the island's one town. But then comes the morning when you wake up and face a challenge. Unknown to you during the night, troops from a nearby nation have invaded the island. They're well armed, well positioned. They've taken over a building as their headquarters right across the street from your church. And some of them are even in the church and have replaced its altar with a pagan altar. You're no longer permitted to possess a Bible, nor can you read one. You're told that if you baptize your child, you and your child will be killed. You're forbidden to take part in any Christian observances. The rulers of the occupying nation force you to worship him as a god. And he is the inspired one, and you say, oh, he's the insane one. Okay. He commands that a dog be offered on a pagan altar in your church, and that everybody has to eat a piece of cooked dog once a year to show that they are loyal to him. And his goal is to rule the entire world. How do you live in that situation, right? He's writing this story to say, this is what the Jews faced when Antiochus showed up and occupied their area, okay?
What's happening in Africa now?
Right. I mean, what you find, what's interesting about the apocalyptic writings is you find similar echoes of that in other places in history. And hint, 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 when we get to the book of Revelation, we're going to encounter another apocalyptic writing. In fact, the book Revelation, its Greek name is Apocalypsis. And so some Bibles, instead of saying the revelation of John, say the apocalypse of John. We hear apocalypse and we think, destruction, but apocalypse really means revealing, is what the Greek word means. And his suggestion on page 102 in point 4 is that the only way you're going to survive in a situation like this is not open revolt, but underground resistance literature. You would probably publish stories that make sense to the people inside, but don't make sense to the people outside, trying to give the hope that you're going to make it through. So that's an example of a situation there. And then page 103 lists things that are often featured in apocalyptic writings. And in the unit to come after this, when we read the section on the books known as the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha, there's a whole bunch of writings that are a part that follow these same patterns, but that were never welcomed into the Hebrew Bible. Daniel, the argument of this author that we're using here, he argues Daniel is the one that was brought in. And so we'll talk more about that, but we don't have to go into detail. But if you look at page 103, you can see some of these factors or themes that are there. There's what's called as dualism, good versus evil. There's a cosmic conflict. It's not just a fight happening on some little community, but heaven, earth, the underworld, the inhabitants, all these kinds of things are in place. Eschatology, a fancy word that refers to the end of times. A lot of apocalyptic writing talk about the end of the end times. Divine deliverance, number 4, that God is going to intervene, that God is going to step in and rescue, that our hope is not in our own power, but in God, that there's going to be a new age. There's going to be that this world will come to a close and God will bring about a new one. There are often visions that are seen, and the pseudonymity, the writings that are, nobody knows who the writer is, but they're claiming to be someone else. There's often a messianic figure, some kind of Messiah in the apocalyptic writing. There's that in-between time, the troubled time now, the good time to come, and then that time in between. You'll hear about angels and demons. There will be really strange symbols that doesn't always pan out. Numbers get used in kind of symbolic ways. There's often times of woe and destruction and warning. And then, of course, responsibility. Everything is left to God. It's going to be God who gets us out of this mess that we're in. So these patterns are often playing themselves out in these apocalyptic writings. We're going to look a little bit at Daniel from that perspective, but in the next unit, you're going to get little simple tastes of some of these other writings. And I'll bring books down that you can look at if you want. And we'll talk more about that, okay? So that sort of sets us up with what comes next, which is this illustration on pages 104 and the accompanying text that follows. So here again, the land of Palestine, Israel, Canaan, the Holy Land, Israel, all these different names that we give to it, the land flowing with milk and honey, right? Here's your little pea, here's your kidney bean, here's your connecting line, your swoop. And Antioch of Syria is up here. Okay? And what happens is this, that Antiochus IV wants to impose Hellenism. So there is this column. And he is finding that the resistance in Jerusalem is particularly troublesome. And so he is going to try and stamp out the practice of Judaism. Hard to believe, but there were people often in positions of power and authority already who actually welcomed the things that Antiochus was trying to do in terms of Hellenizing, because they were in privileged places. They were exempt from taxes. They received all sorts of benefits for going along with the regime. Aren't you glad stuff like that doesn't happen anymore in our world? And Antiochus, though, is trying to stamp this out, and this will lead to the rebellion that we looked at a little bit last time with the Maccabees, but we're in the pre-rebellion part in this lesson. So Antiochus is still in power. He's trying to enforce his ways and his wishes upon the Jewish people. And that leads us to what we will find in Daniel. So I'm going to leave these pictures up for a bit and invite you to open up in your Bibles to Daniel. Now remember, there are those within the Christian family who would disagree with this viewpoint and who would say that Daniel is all about what happens under King Nebuchadnezzar, and it's exactly as it's described there under Nebuchadnezzar and the successors in Babylon. But the point in this lesson takes is that no, this is actually written during Antiochus's time, using stories of this ancient person called Daniel and some of his friends to make it sound like it's happening in Babylon, but it's really being experienced by the people in the promised land under Antiochus. And so we'll take it apart. Who would like to read Daniel chapter 1?
In the third year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord let King Jehoiakim of Judah fall into his power, as well as some of the vessels of the house of God. These he brought to the land of Shinar and placed the vessels in the treasury of his gods. Then the king commanded his palace master, Ashpenaz, to bring some of the Israelites of the royal family and of the nobility, young men without physical defect and handsome, versed in every branch of wisdom, endowed with knowledge and insight, and competent to serve in the king's palace. They were to be taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the royal rations of food and wine. They were to be educated for 3 years, so that at the end of that time they could be stationed in the king's court. Among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah from the tribe of Judah. The palace master gave them other names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of food and wine. So he asked the palace master to allow him not to defile himself. Now God allowed Daniel to receive favor and compassion from the palace master. The palace master said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king. He has appointed your food and your drink. If he should see you in poorer condition than the other young men of your own age, you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel asked the guard whom the palace master had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. You can then compare our appearance with the appearance of the young men who eat the royal rations, and deal with your servants according to what you observe. So he agreed to this proposal and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was observed that they appeared better and fatter than all the young men who had been eating the royal rations. So the guard continued to withdraw their royal rations and the wine they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and skill in every aspect of literature and wisdom. Daniel also had insight into all visions and dreams. At the end of the time that the king had set for them to be brought in, the palace master brought them into the presence of Nebuchadnezzar, and the king spoke with them. And among them all, no one was found to compare with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they were stationed in the king's court. In every matter of wisdom and understanding concerning which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel continued there until the 1st year of King Cyrus.
Okay, so one of the things we're going to notice with Daniel, when you read it, is unlike some of the other Bible books that we've read through so far, you've got these sort of independent stories being told in the first 6 chapters. And then if you got a chance to read it, in the second 6 chapters, you get some pretty bizarre visions that are shared, right? And so even the way the book of Daniel is constructed is quite different from any of the other books that we've been looking at in our Bible so far. We will have, there's a little section at the end that we'll get a chance to look at a little bit. But when you read through the book of Daniel, there's also some historical challenges that occur. For example, we don't read in the writing of Kings, when we read through about Nebuchadnezzar coming and about Jeremiah and Ezekiel, we don't read anything about this first deportation that's described here, while Jehoiakim is still king. In fact, Jehoiakim dies while the Babylonians are besieging the Jerusalem, and his son Jehoiachin is on the throne for 3 months before the Babylonians finally breach and take control. And that's in 597 BC. So again, we're not going to get too worked up about the details now, but just again to point out that the structure of Daniel's different than what we've been encountering so far. This first story is about food. And these 4 young men without defect, who are handsome, who are from the royal family, are selected, among others, to get special education overseen by Nebuchadnezzar's school. And he's fishing for future employees, right? He's looking for people who might be competent, as it says, to serve. And the conflict in this first narrative is about food, right? There's the king's ration, his daily portion of the royal rations of food and wine, as described in verse 5. Well, from a Jewish perspective, or at least an observant Jewish perspective, what's the potential problem there?
Unclean food.
Not kosher,
Yeah.
right? Unclean. Maybe. Why? Well, maybe the meat that would be served came out of the meat market in those days is the animals sacrificed in the temple, right? But this is a Babylonian temple, not the Jewish temple. That's right. So there's that problem. Or the wood that would be used to cook might have been harvested from the quote unquote sacred groves, right? I mean, there's problems here with kosher. And the only possible solution is vegetables and water. But the risk that their teacher faced was what? If he feeds them vegetables and water, yeah, they may look kind of wimpy skimpy, right?
Then it's his head.
And then it's his head. So they agree to kind of come to this agreement that, you know what, just let us try it for 10 days, see how it works. Okay, I can pull that off. And what happens?
They become better.
They're even more beautiful than everybody else, right? Antiochus, you might remember, tried to stamp out distinctive Jewish practices, and he required all Jews to eat pork to demonstrate their willingness to cooperate with him. You need to eat this food from the king. And of course, the story of Daniel, the writer here, is don't eat the king's rich food. You're going to be better for it. And so it's just kind of this standalone story that we go, well, what do you do with this? Well, if indeed the viewpoint taken here is this is underground literature, this story is told to let the Jewish people know you don't have to eat his food. You're going to be better for it if you don't.
Isn't he, the writer, encouraging, so he's encouraging them to defy the king and probably be put to death, but the writer's not putting his name on it because he doesn't want to be put to death. Like, it's almost like, I don't know.
Right. You've got this resistance. And of course, I mean, here's the reality. The reality is, go back to Hitler. Okay, and what Hitler tried to do. The reality of imposing your will on a large group of people is you can't. So you either you'll have some who do, and you hope they'll influence more. You got some who resist, and you try and wipe out the most prominent resistors so that you can sort of cow everybody else into obedience. I mean, this is, again, particularly what we see happening in history. You just, unless you're going to wipe everybody out, and sometimes, I mean, that's finally what Hitler did, right? Tried,
Yeah.
and then moved people off into concentration camps and began to slowly obliterate. I mean, it's terrible. And this was happening right out in the open. It's so, yeah, I mean, so this is the argument from this emphasis here. Well, there's another story that, again, pretty much stands on its own. Who'd like to read chapter 2?
One night during the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such a disturbing dream that he couldn't sleep. He called on his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers, and he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed. As they stood before the king, he said, I have had a dream that deeply troubles me, and I must know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, Long live the king, tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means. But the king said to the astrologers, I am serious about this. If you do not tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. But if you tell me what I dreamed and what the dreams mean, I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors. Just tell me the dream and what it means. They said again, Please, your majesty, tell us the dream and we will tell you what it means. The king replied, I know what you are doing. You are stalling for time because you know I am serious when I say, if you don't tell me the dream, you are doomed. So you have conspired to tell me lies, hoping I will change my mind. But tell me the dream, and then I will know that you can tell me what it means. The astrologers replied to the king, No one on earth can tell the king his dream, and no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. The king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people. The king was furious when he heard this, and he ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed. And because of the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. He asked Arioch, why has the king issued such a harsh decree? So Arioch told him all that had happened. Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time to see the king, requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. Then Daniel went home and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah what had happened. He urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secrets so they would not be executed, along with the other wise men of Babylon. That night, the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven, and he said, "Praise the name of God forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of the world's events. He removed kings and set up other kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in the darkness, though he is surrounded by light. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we asked of you and revealed to us what the king demanded." Then Daniel went to see Arioch, whom the king had ordered to execute the wise men of Babylon. Daniel said to him, "Don't kill the wise men. Take me to the king, and I will tell him the meaning of his dream." Arioch quickly took Daniel to the king and said, "I have found one of the captives from Judah who will tell the king the meaning of his dream." The king said to Daniel, also known as Belteshazzar, "Is this true? Can you tell me what my dream was and what it means?" Daniel replied, "There are no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or fortune tellers who can reveal the king's secret. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the future. Now I will tell you your dream and the visions you saw as you lie in your bed. While your majesty was sleeping, you dreamed about coming events. He who reveals secrets has shown you that what is going to happen. And it is not because I am wiser than anyone else, but I know the secrets of your dream. But because God wants you to understand what was in your heart. In your vision, your majesty, you saw standing before you a huge shining statue of a man. It was a frightening sight. The head of the statue was made of fine gold. His chest and arms were silver. Its belly and thighs were bronze. His legs were iron, and his feet were a combination of iron and baked clay. As you watched, a rock was cut from a mountain, but not by human hands. It struck the feet of iron and clay, smashing them to bits. The whole statue was crushed into small pieces of iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold. Then the wind blew them away without a trace, like chaff on the threshing floor. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain that covered the whole earth. That was the dream. Now we will tell the king what it means. Your majesty, you are the greatest of kings. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and honor. He has made you the ruler over all the inhabited world and has put even the wild animals and birds under your control. You are the head of gold. But after your kingdom comes to an end, another kingdom inferior to yours will rise to take your place. After that kingdom has fallen, yet a third kingdom represented by bronze will rise to rule the world. Following that kingdom, there will be a fourth, strong as iron. That kingdom will smash and crush all previous empires, just as iron smashes and crushes everything it strikes. The feet and toes you saw were a combination of iron and baked clay, showing that this kingdom will be divided. Like iron mixed with clay, it will have some of the strength of iron, but whilst some parts of it will be as strong as iron, other parts will be weak as clay. This mixture of iron and clay also shows that these kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage, but they will not hold together just as iron and clay do not mix. During the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed or conquered. It will crush all these kingdoms into nothingness, and it will stand forever. That is the meaning of the rock cut from the mountain, though not by human hands, that crushed to pieces the statue of iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold. The great God was showing the king what will happen in the future. The dream is true and its meaning is certain. Then King Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel and worshipped him and commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burnt sweet incense before him. The king said to Daniel, "Truly your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret." Then the king appointed Daniel to a high position and gave him many valuable gifts. He made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chief over all his wise men. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be in charge of all the affairs of the province of Babylon, while Daniel remained in the king's court.
Okay, I'm just writing myself a note here. Wherever you're at and wherever you end up with this understanding of how and when Daniel's written and what its purpose for, you've probably both starting especially in this story and with some of the other stories to ahead, have thought to yourself, these kings are nuts. Right?
Mhm.
Okay, that's another thing. Antiochus Epiphanes, they called him Antiochus Epimanes, the mad one, the crazy one, right? And so when you're looking at this, the crazy behavior of this king, that's a part of the almost the veiled sarcasm, right? And we get it here, we'll get it in chapter 6 too, when it starts talking about his, and they use different words. My translation says his magicians, his enchanters, his sorcerers, his Chaldeans, his fortune tellers, his astrologers. I mean, you get all these things. You got, what does this guy have? You know, I mean, so part of it is this sort of undercurrent of sarcasm. But here's this vision he has of this giant statue, right? And the point is that the Jews have suffered long under the Babylonians. That's the gold head. The Medes, that's the silver. The Persians, that's the bronze. The Greeks, that's the iron. And then the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, those are the iron and the clay mixing together. And then comes this rock not cut by human hands. So whose hands does it have to be? God's. This rock comes and smashes the feet of the statue and everything breaks down to nothing, right? And then the wind just blows it away and it's gone. Meanwhile, the rock grows into this mountain, right? And the point is, although they presently suffer under Antiochus, the kingdom of God will soon break in and the Jews will be given authority over the whole world. The bad times are almost over. This is what the dream is getting at. Now, the next story. And we'll come back to some of these. Who'd like to read chapter 3?
King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits and whose width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the prefects and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to assemble and come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. When they were standing before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Accordingly, at this time, certain Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble shall fall down and worship the golden statue, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought in. So they brought those men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods and you do not worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire music ensemble, to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face was distorted. He ordered the furnace heated up 7 times more than was customary, and ordered some of the strongest guards in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So the men were bound, still wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, "Was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the fire?" They answered the king, "True, O king." He replied, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the 4th has the appearance of a god." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their tunics were not harmed, and not even the smell of fire came from them. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
Now, this story we heard in Sunday school.
Potatoes.
Veggie Tales, yeah. May remember it more that way. Again, taking the viewpoint from here that these are later stories. These are stories written later, pretending to be from further back to address a certain time. You again get a Nebuchadnezzar who's kind of out of it. Gets so angry, his face gets distorted. You've got these, the statue, 60 cubits, that's 90 feet high, and 9 cubits would be, or 6 cubits would be 9 feet wide. So this is this massive thing. And he had just in the previous chapter said that Daniel's God is God of gods and Lord of lords. And now he's building this statue to himself. So the disconnect, but the stories are there. And then all these instruments, right? You wonder how many different kinds of instruments they can have. The horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the drum, the entire musical ensemble. You get kind of that satirical sense. But what's the point? Well, Antiochus IV Epiphanes set up an altar and a worship place to Olympian Zeus inside the precincts of the Jewish temple, and wanted every single person to offer a sacrifice at that altar, eat some pork, prove that they were loyal. And if they weren't, they were going to be killed. So you get the parallel kind of thing here. And so the message is, don't pay homage to that Olympian Zeus. That's the abomination of desolation, as it's described. And we'll come back, but we got to keep going. Chapter 4. Here's another long story. Who wants to read this long one? Anybody? No? Okay, I'll do it. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages that live throughout the earth, may you have abundant prosperity. The signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me, I am pleased to recount. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his sovereignty is from generation to generation. Now it sounds like he's extolling God, right? But now look what comes next. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living at ease in my home and prospering in my palace. I saw a dream that frightened me. My fantasies in bed and the visions of my head terrified me. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me in order that they might tell me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the diviners came in, and I told them the dream. Notice this time he tells them, I told them the dream, but they could not tell me its interpretation. At last Daniel came in before me, he who is named Belteshazzar after the name of my God, and who is endowed with the spirit of the holy gods, and I told him the dream. O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that you are endowed with the spirit of the holy gods, and that no mystery is too difficult for you. Hear the dream that I saw. Tell me its interpretation. Upon my bed, this is what I saw. There was a tree at the center of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew great and strong. Its top reached to heaven. It was visible to the ends of the whole earth. Its foliage was beautiful, its fruit abundant, and it provided food for all. The animals and the field found shade under it. The birds in the air nested in its branches, and from it all living beings were fed. I continued looking in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and there was a holy watcher coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said, "Cut down the tree and chop off its branches, strip it of its foliage and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from beneath it and the birds from its branches, but leave its stump and roots in the ground, with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. Let him be bathed with the dew of heaven, and let his lot be with the animals of the field, in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a human, and let the mind of an animal be given to him, and let 7 times pass over him. The sentence is rendered by decree of the watchers. The decision is given by order of the holy ones, in order that all who live may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdom of mortals. He gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of human beings. This is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw. Now you, Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are unable to tell me in the interpretation. You are able, however, for you are endowed with the spirit of the holy gods." Then Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar, was severely distressed for a while. His thoughts terrified him. The king said, "Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or the interpretation terrify you." Belteshazzar answered, "My lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. The tree that you saw, which grew great and strong, so that its top reached to heaven and was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose foliage was beautiful and its fruit abundant, and which provided food for all, under which animals of the field lived, and in whose branches the birds of the air had nests, it is you, O king. You have grown great and strong. Your greatness has increased and reaches to heaven, and your sovereignty to the end of the earth. And whereas the king saw a holy watcher coming down from heaven and saying, 'Cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the ground, with a band of iron and bronze in the grass of the field, and let him be bathed with the dew of heaven, and let his lot be with the animals of the field until 7 times pass over him,' this is the interpretation, O king. And it is a decree of the Most High that has come upon my lord the king. You shall be driven away from human society, and your dwelling shall be with the wild animals. You shall be made to eat grass like oxen. You shall be bathed with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you have learned that the Most High has sovereignty over the kingdom of mortals, and gives it to whom he will. As it was commanded to leave the stumps and roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be reestablished for you from the time that you learn that heaven is sovereign. Therefore, O king, may my counsel be acceptable to you. Atone for your sins with righteousness, and your iniquities with mercy to the oppressed, so that your prosperity may be prolonged." All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, and the king said, Is this not magnificent Babylon, which I have built as a royal capital by my mighty power and for my glorious majesty?" While the words were still in his mouth, a voice came from heaven. "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, the kingdom has departed from you. You shall be driven away from human society, and your dwelling shall be with the animals of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you have learned that the Most High has sovereignty over the kingdoms of mortals, and gives it to whom he will." Immediately, the sentence was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven away from human society, ate grass like oxen, and his body was bathed with the dew of heaven until his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers and his nails became like bird's claws. When that period was over, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored the one who lives forever. For his sovereignty is an everlasting sovereignty, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does what he wills with the hosts of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, what are you doing? At that time, my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. My counselors and my lords sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are truth, all his ways are justice, and he is able to bring low those who walk in pride. The suggested message is Antiochus dreams of acquiring and controlling a vast realm. However, he is mad, and God will soon cut him down to size. This next one's not so long. Who wants to do that one? Natalie, go ahead. Now it's a new king.
King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to those wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. May the king live forever, she said. Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There's a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and you have insight, intelligence, and understand wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered the king, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived in the wild, lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven. until he acknowledged that the Most High God was sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and sets them over anyone he wishes, excuse me. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines drank wine from them. You promised the gods of silver, of gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, parson. Here is what the words mean. Meaning, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Whereas your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62.
Okay, so here we have some of those temple vessels, and then comes the words, right? Mene, tekel, parson, which mean counted, or numbered, weighed, divided. The point being that Antiochus had plundered the Jerusalem temple. God's not going to let him get away with it. God will soon destroy him and do away with his realm. One more story that's perhaps even more well known. Who'd like to read this one? All right.
Please, Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps stationed throughout the whole kingdom, and over them were 3 presidents, including Daniel. It's his presidents, right? Or-
Yes, says presidents.
Okay.
This translation. Other translations have what?
Administrator.
Administrators? Yeah.
Including Daniel. To these the satraps gave account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Soon Daniel distinguished himself above all the other presidents and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to appoint him over the whole kingdom. So the presidents and the satraps tried to find grounds for complaint against Daniel in connection with the kingdom, but they could find no grounds for complaint or any corruption, because he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption could be found in him. The men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So the presidents and satraps conspired and came to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever." All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, all agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an interdict that whoever prays to anyone, divine or human, for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions. Now, O king, establish the interdict and sign the documents so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and interdict. Although Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he continued to go to his house, which had windows in its upper room open towards Jerusalem, and to get down on his knees 3 times a day to pray to his God and praise him, just as he had done previously. The conspirators came and found Daniel praying and seeking mercy before his God. Then they approached the king and said concerning the interdict, "O king, did you not sign an interdict that anyone who prays to anyone, divine or human, within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions?" The king answered, "The king stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked." Then they responded to the king, "Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, paid no attention to you, O king, or to the interdict that you have signed, but he is saying his prayers 3 times a day. When the king heard the charge, he was very much distressed. He was determined to save Daniel, and until the sun went down, he made every effort to rescue him. Then the conspirators came to the king and said to him, "Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and the Persians that no edict or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed." Then the king gave the command, and Daniel was brought and thrown into the den of lions. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you faithfully serve, deliver you." Stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lord, so that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No food was brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then, at break of day, the king got up and hurried to the den of lions. When he came near the den where Daniel was, he cried out anxiously to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you faithfully serve, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Daniel then said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king. I have done no wrong." Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. The king gave a command, and those who had accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. Before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples and nations of every language throughout the whole world, "May you have abundant prosperity. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people should tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian.
All right. So I'm dating myself here, but I can still in my mind's eye see the little flannel graph in my Sunday school classroom where, Daniel and the lion's den were put there, but at least to my memory, I don't remember the last part of the story of any flanographs of throwing in these people who get torn limb from limb and broken in pieces, right? And yet this tends to be one of the most well-known stories that we share with our kids, but we just sort of leave the nasty part out at the end. And again, you may or may not agree with the position here, but the idea is don't acknowledge Antiochus as divine in any way. God will soon deal with his arrogance. What's interesting with however you understand Daniel, it's interesting to note that there's these sort of standalone stories at the beginning, and with several with Nebuchadnezzar, but then with other kings, Belshazzar and Darius the Mede, and that there's not often connections because you have the king at the end saying, "Oh, this God is great and wonderful. Let's everybody worship this God." And then you get to the next story and like it's all forgotten that that's there. So however people end up with understanding, is Daniel written, are these apocalyptic writings in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, writing as if they were happening 400 years in the past? Or are these stories from there? And some will even argue a little bit with both. They'll say the stories were written down in the past, but they were never made public until you came to Antiochus. Who knows for sure? But these 6 stories change now to these very strange visions. And we're going to try and zip through. That was the first 6 chapters. We're going to try and zip through the next 6 chapters in a pretty fast order. And I'll put this picture up here, and then I'm just going to move to where it kind of takes it into sections, okay? So Daniel chapter 7. In the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and vision of his head as he lay in bed. Then he wrote down the dream. I, Daniel, saw in my vision by night the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. Okay, so you get the winds here at the top, and it says four great beasts came out of the sea, different from one another. And so here's the land in which he's thinking. The first beast was what? A winged lion, right? And then its wings were taken off, right? And it was made to stand on the ground. Well, interesting enough, the Babylonians used in their art to tell about themselves that they were always pictured as a winged lion. Then he has another beast. It looks like a bear. Raised up on one side, it has three tusks and mouth among its teeth, and it's told, arise, devour many bodies. And this bear would represent the Medes. Okay. Then another vision of leopards, and Cyrus the Persian, as swift as leopards, comes in and gains control of the land. And then there's a fourth beast, right? Exceedingly strong, great iron teeth, devouring, breaking in pieces, stamping what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that preceded it. And it had 10 horns. What's this? This are the Greeks coming. Alexander. And then it's talking about these horns, and we'll kind of move up here and picture this here. We've got the horns that this little one breaks off, and that's Antiochus, who thinks he's so great. It says, as I watched, the thrones were in place. This is verse 9. And an ancient one took his throne, his clothing white as snow, the hair of his head like pure wool, his throne like fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were over. Okay, or were open. Remember this when we get to Revelation and we see some things hanging on. But notice at the end of verse 8, this little horn speaks arrogantly, right? Thinking it's big, hot stuff. Then it says, verse 11, I watched then because of the noise of the arrogant words that the horn was speaking. As I watched, the beast was put to death, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So here now comes this divine one, and he's gonna, we'll hear about this Son of Man, and wham, he's gonna let him have it. So that's kind of what's happening here. Verse 13. Somebody pick up reading.
I saw one like a human being coming with clouds of heaven, and it came to the ancient one and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed.
And what's interesting in verse 13, some of you don't have human one or human being, you have what? Son of Man? That's that Son of Man. Jesus makes reference to that in himself. So we'll come back to this. Keep going, Sherry.
As for me, Daniel, my spirit was troubled within me, and the visions of my head terrified me. I approached one of the attendants to ask him the truth concerning all this. So he said that he would disclose to me the interpretation of the matter. As for these four great beasts, 4 kings shall arise out of the earth, but the holy ones of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. Then I desired to know the truth concerning the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying,
with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left of its feet. And concerning the 10 horns that were on its head, and concerning the other horn, which came up and made room, for which 3 of them fell out. The horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke arrogantly, and that seemed greater than the others. As I looked, this horn made war with the holy ones and was prevailing over them until the ancient one came. Then judgment was given for the holy ones of the Most High, and the time arrived when the holy ones gained possession of the kingdom. This is what he said. As for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth that shall be different from all the other kingdoms. It shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it into pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of which kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. This one shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, shall wear out the holy ones of the Most High, and shall attempt to change the sacred seasons and the law. And they shall be given into his power for a time, 2 times, and a half a time. Then the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and totally destroyed. The kingship and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the holy ones of the Most High. Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey them. Here the account ends. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly terrified me, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter in my mind.
So what we have happening then is this image of this, of course, would be Antiochus, that God is going to raise up someone who will defeat the enemies, and there will be power and position for the Hebrew people. It encourages those facing death in his persecution to stand firm. And here it gets pretty specific because it talks about this one who shall attempt to change the law, change the sacred seasons, and you get that kind of connection a little bit clearer. The message, God will not permit Antiochus's ravings to continue much longer. That's that time, 2 times, half a time, 3.5 years. He will soon usher in the final kingdom for which you have been anxiously awaiting, and you will rule it forever. So there's lots of things going on in this picture pertaining to that. And then finally, there's one final kind of vision here. And this is in chapter 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They're kind of a series of visions that all repeat in some different ways. We got a little bit of time left. I know. Yep, that's fine. So we're still with Belshazzar. Somebody care to read? Kathy? We're in chapter 8.
In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that had appeared to me at first. In the vision, I was looking and saw myself in Susa, the capital, in the province of Elam, and I was by the river of Eli. I looked up and saw a ram standing beside the river. It had 2 horns. Both horns were long, but one was longer than the other. And the longer one came up from the second. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. All beasts were powerless to withstand it, and no one could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became strong.
I'll stop you there. So that ram that had one horn longer than the other, that is, if you will, what they sometimes call the Medo-Persian Empire. It's able to march in any direction and conquer anything. Nobody can stand against it. But now another one appears. Go ahead.
As I was watching, a male goat appeared from the west, coming across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. The goat had a horn between its eyes. It came toward the ram with the 2 horns that I had seen standing beside the river, and it ran at it with savage force. I saw it approaching the ram. It was enraged against against it and struck the ram, breaking its two horns. The ram did not have power to withstand it. It threw the ram down to the ground and trampled upon it, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from its power.
I'll stop you there. So now here comes this goat from the west, AKA Alexander the Great, who's going to fight against the ram and whammo, defeat him. He knocks him out, knocks him down, controls him. That's not too hard, right? Keep going.
Then the male goat grew exceedingly great, but at the height of its power, the great horn was broken, and in its place there came up four prominent horns toward the four winds of heaven.
Okay, so now what happens? Alexander dies, broken horn, and his kingdom is divided amongst his four generals, four horns. Keep going.
Out of one of them came another horn, a little one, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land.
Stop there. A little one. And we had that previously. Who's that going to be? Antiochus. What do you suppose the beautiful land is? Israel, Palestine, Judah, whatever you want to call it, right? That's there. Keep going.
It grew as high as the host of heaven. It threw down to the earth some of the host and some of the stars and trampled on them. Even against the prince of the host, it acted arrogantly. It took the regular burnt offering away from him and overthrew the place of his sanctuary.
Hear that? Right? He comes. This out of these four horns, this one grows and not going to pay attention to him, right? We'll keep going.
Because of the wickedness, the host was given over to it, together with the regular burnt offerings. It cast truth to the ground and kept prospering in what it did. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one that it spoke, "For how long in this vision concerning the regular burnt offering and transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over the sanctuary and the host to be trampled?" And he answered him, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state."
So that thing in verse 13 is that abomination of desolation, that altar set up to Zeus in the temple. How long is this going to continue? How long do we have to deal with it? Keep going.
When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I tried to understand it. Then someone appeared standing before me, having the appearance of a man. And I heard a human voice from the Eli saying, "Gabriel, help this man understand the vision." So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I became frightened and fell prostrate. But he said to me, "Understand, O mortal, that the vision is for the time of the end." As he was speaking to me, I fell into a trance, face to the ground. Then he touched me and set me on my feet. He said, "Listen, and I will tell you what will take place later in the period of wrath, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with two horns, these are kings of Media and Persia. The male goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between its eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which four others arose, four kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. At the end of their rule, when the transgressions have reached their full measure, a king of bold countenance shall rise, skilled in intrigue. He shall grow strong in power, shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does. He shall destroy the powerful and the people of the holy ones. By his cunning, he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind, he shall be great. Without warning, he shall destroy many, and shall even rise up against the princes. But he shall be broken, and not by human hands. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that have been told is true. As for you, seal up the vision
refers to many days from now. So I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I arose and went about the king's business, but I was dismayed by the vision and did not understand it.
So this one's kind of explained to us as we go. And the message, of course, is stand firm. God has things under control. Antiochus' blasphemous activities are soon going to be brought to an end. God will destroy him. There's another vision in chapter 9. Different king. I'll read. In the first year of Darius, son of Ahasuerus, by birth a Mede, who became king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books the number of years that according to the word of the Lord to the prophet Jeremiah must be fulfilled for the devastation of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. Then I turned to the Lord to seek an answer by prayer and supplication with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, and then there's a rather long, lengthy confession here, in which Daniel acknowledges that God's in the right and that the ancestors were wrong, that they are in Babylon because they sinned against him and these kinds of things. We're going to kind of jump ahead then. But it ends with, from verse 17, now therefore, O our God, listen to the prayer of your servant and to his supplication, and for your own sake, Lord, let your face shine upon your desolated sanctuary. Incline your ear, O my God, and hear. Open your eyes and look at our desolation and the city that bears your name. We do not present our supplication before you on the ground of our righteousness, but on the ground of your great mercies. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and act and do not delay. For your own sake, O my God, because your city and your people bear your name. Whether you put this, and this is the fun part about these interpretations, whether you put this back in the times of Babylon or you put it forward under the times of Antiochus, these are beautiful words and confession, acknowledgement of our sin, and recognizing that God, without you, we're lost, right? And while he's speaking, this is verse 20, confessing his sin and the sins of Israel, presenting his prayer, his supplication before God. While he's speaking, here again, Gabriel, called the man, we think of him as the angel Gabriel, whom I'd seen before in a vision, came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He said to me, Daniel, I've now come out to give you wisdom and understanding. At the beginning of your supplication, a word went out, and I've come to declare it to you, for you are greatly loved. So consider the word and understand the vision. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end of sin. So 70, here's where this picture, to show you quickly here, they're in Babylon, they're in exile, and it's not 70 years, but it's 70 weeks of years, or 70 times 7, 490 years. So now we're using some of this numbers in here to indicate that it's going to take a while for God to finally rescue and deliver, and not exactly number wise, but you roughly get from Babylon to where Antiochus is. It's been a long time that we are having people, overpower us and rule over us. When are you going to do it? Because, of course, you can argue that they're under the domination of the Syrians with Antiochus there. And that's partly what's happening. And these 70 weeks are kind of lifted up. And how long is it going to last? Look at towards the end of chapter 9, it says, verse 27, he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of a week he shall make sacrifice and offering cease, right? You can't sacrifice, you can't offer anymore. And in that place, there shall be an abomination that desolates. There's that Olympian Zeus altar, until the decreed end is poured out upon the desolator. In other words, it's gonna end. Hang in there. Chapter 10, 11, and 12, we will need to kind of zip through. but I'll put the picture up here. And what 10, 11, and 12 try and talk about is how there's going to be this conflict and this battle, and how this king of the north is going to fight against the king of the south. Here you've got the Ptolemies and the Seleucids going at it together, and how the king of the south will get defeated by the king of the north, but he'll offer his daughter in marriage to the king of the north. So there's that alliance that's made, and eventually the king of the north is going to get wiped out. And now we're in a different king. Chapter 10, it's the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia. The word was revealed to Daniel, named Belteshazzar. The word was true, and it concerned a great conflict. He understood the word, having received understanding in the vision. Somebody want to read chapter 10? Linda?
At
Start.
that-
Yep, verse 2.
At that time, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 weeks. I had eaten no rich food, no meat or wine had entered my mouth, and I had not anointed myself at all for the full 3 weeks. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I looked up and saw a man clothed in linen, with a belt of gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the roar of a multitude. I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. The people who were with me did not see the vision, though a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone to see this great vision. My strength left me, and my complexion grew deathly pale, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and when I heard the sound of his words, I fell into a trance, face to the ground. But then a hand touched me and roused me to my hands and knees. He said to me, Daniel, greatly beloved, pay attention to the words that I am going to speak to you. Stand on your feet, for I have now been sent to you. So while he was speaking this word to me, I stood up trembling. He said to me, do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me 21 days. So Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I left him there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia, and have come to help you understand what is to happen to your people at the end of days, where there is a further vision for those days. While he was speaking these words to me, I turned my face toward the ground and was speechless. Then one in human form touched my lips, and I opened my mouth to speak and said to the one who stood before me, my Lord, because of the vision, such pains have come upon me that I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For I am shaking, no strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. Again, one in human form touched me and strengthened me. He said, do not fear, greatly beloved, you are safe. Be strong and courageous. When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, do you know why I have come to you? Now I must return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I am through with him, the prince of Greece will come. But I am to tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is no one with me who contends against these princes except Michael, your prince.
Keep going.
Chapter 11.
Yeah, through verse 4.
As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to support and strengthen him. Now I will announce the truth to you. 3 more kings shall arise in Persia. The 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a warrior king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and take action as he pleases. And while still rising in power, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, not according to the dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted and go to the others besides these.
So we're being again reference to the strength of the Persians going to be overcome by the Greeks. And I'll put a little bit of the picture here, and you get this battling coming. And so the Greeks will be in control. They will, there will be some separation happening. Look on page 112. Point number 2. It references these parallel histories of the Ptolemies, that's the Greek helmet, the sword, and the pyramid, and their campaigns against each other, their alliances, their marriages. But then finally, in the bigger paragraph, Antiochus IV appears, so that's this guy here, and he's going to try and take control of the temple, the priesthood, the scrolls. He's going to try and wipe it all out. And it's not gonna happen. But there's this, look, for example, verse 5, back in your Bibles, chapter 11. The king of the south shall go strong, but one of his officers shall grow stronger. After some years, they'll make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to ratify the agreement, right? They're going to try and make this marriage. It's not going to happen. Skip ahead to verse 10. His son shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces like a flood and pass through and again carry on the war. Skipping ahead to verse 14. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south. The lawless among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. In other words, they're for Daniel's people, there's going to be some who support, who say, you know what, I'm behind Antiochus. We're gonna support him, and it's all described in here. Let's see, where are we gonna jump? Jump down to verse 20. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an official for the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be broken, though not in anger or battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person. Guess who that is? On whom royal majesty had not been conferred. He shall come without warning and obtain the kingdom through intrigue. Armies shall be utterly swept away and broken before him, etc., etc., etc. Until you finally get into verse 36. The king shall act as he pleases. He shall exalt himself and consider himself greater than any god, and shall speak horrendous things against the God of gods. He shall prosper until the period of wrath is completed, for what is determined shall be done. He shall pay no respect to the gods of his ancestors, or to the one beloved by women. He shall pay no respect to any other gods, for he shall consider himself greater than all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his ancestors did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest of the fortresses. In other words, he just keeps putting himself higher and higher and higher. But then at the end, he's going to be destroyed. Somebody read 40 to the end of the chapter from chapter 11. Ken, go ahead.
And at the time of the end, the king of the south will attack the king of the north. The king of the north will storm out with chariots and charioteers and a vast navy. He will invade various lands and sweep through them like a flood. He will enter the glorious land of Israel, and all the nations will fall. But Moab, Edom, and the best part of Ammon will escape. He will conquer many countries, and even Egypt will not escape. He will gain control over the gold, silver, and treasures of Egypt, and the Libyans and Ethiopians will be his servants. But then news from the east and the north will alarm him, and he will set out in great anger to destroy and obliterate many. He will stop between the glorious holy mountain and the sea, and will pitch his royal tents. But while he is there, his time will suddenly run out, and no one will help him.
So it's kind of predicting what's going to happen. History tells us that Antiochus didn't die this way. He died in a different way. But Ken, keep going in chapter 12.
At that time, Michael the archangel, who stands guard over your nation, will arise. Then there will be a time of anguish greater than any since nations first came into existence. But at that time, every one of your people whose name is written in the book will be rescued. Many of those whose bodies lie dead and buried will rise up, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting disgrace.
I'll stop you there. Here is the first clear reference of the resurrection of the dead. It's very much a New Testament concept, but it first begins to emerge here in these verses in Daniel, and we'll get a chance to look more at those. But what I'd like to do at the end with our time, since we've already kind of run over, turn to page 113. I don't want you to make an overly big deal out of what's here, because again, there are some view, as he's describing here, that Daniel is actually a later work written in pseudonymously, reaching back to Babylonian times and using those characters there to speak to their present age. And part of the reason he does so is because of these examples that are here. For example, point 1, the opening verse of Daniel says that Nebuchadnezzar set siege to Jerusalem in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim's rule, but Nebuchadnezzar, which would have been 606 BC, but Nebuchadnezzar didn't become king until 605 BC. So there's a little bit of a problem there. And it was in Jehoiakim's 11th year. So there's what we read about in Kings kind of conflicts with what we read about here as one example. Point 2 talks about these 4 young Judeans who are going to be trained for 3 years, but by the time you get into chapter 2 of Daniel, they've only been trained 1 year and are already in positions of elevated leadership. We read in chapter 4 about Nebuchadnezzar living as a wild animal for 7 years. It seems a little strange, again, not impossible, that after doing that for 7 years, he would be welcomed back to a position of power. Or what about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refusing to bow down and being thrown into the fiery furnace? Where's Daniel at that point? Or the Belshazzar, who's said to be the son of Nebuchadnezzar, isn't the son of Nebuchadnezzar. His father was named Nabonidus, but even so, he doesn't have any idea who Daniel is. If Daniel was such a high leader in the king, I mean, there's just these little disconnects that go. And so the problem in the debate between those who want to put Daniel in the time it was written in the time it was depicted, they've got problems they have to overcome. The ones who say, no, it's written much later and it replied, they've got problems they have to overcome. So nobody's got like a perfect case to make for their position. So just be aware of that as you read. And Darius the Mede, it references that. Nobody knows who Darius the Mede is. And what's interesting is people on both camps say, we have no idea who Darius the Mede is. So those who say these are stories written during this time, and there was some Darius the Mede, we just don't know anything about him, and history tells us nothing, and we just have to live with that. And those over here say, yeah, there's this Darius the Mede, and nobody knows who he is. I mean, it's interesting anyway. But
Yeah, there's the meat that nobody knows.
sorry.
That Daniel, who's Daniel?
Well, right. I remember we looked at that passage in Ezekiel where, and I asked you to reference it, where it talked about how even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in that city, I would still only save those 3 and all the other inhabitants would be wiped out.
And where was that?
That's in Ezekiel. Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can find quick where it is, just a minute. I don't think I have it in this book. I'm gonna have to go back and look. But I think it's Ezekiel 14. Let's see if that's right. Let's just go back and. This is all being recorded, so if I'm totally wrong on this, you'll know that I don't have all the answers, which I never claimed to begin with. But let's just see if it's in Ezekiel 14. I don't think so. Is it? Yeah, Ezekiel 14. So like verse 12. It says, the word of the Lord came to me, mortal, when a land sins against me by acting faithlessly, and I stretch out my hand against it and break its staff of bread and send famine upon it and cut off from it human beings and animals, even if Noah, Daniel, and Job, these three were in it, they would save only their own lives by their righteousness, says the Lord. And so that passage makes it seem like, Noah, Daniel, and Job are ancient people in their oral history someplace. Who knows for sure? So you need to have a little bit of a posture of humility as you go about these things. But I think it is interesting that the stories in the book of Daniel are kind of independent of each other. There's a little bit of crisscross, and you've got different kings. And what's fascinating is they tell the story of what unfolded between the Babylonian exile to the time of Antiochus is very clearly accurate. And as they, particularly like in chapter 11, as they describe what's going to happen to Antiochus, pretty soon God's going to get him. I mean, God finally does get him, but not in the way it's described here. And so that's what is important then to get. So if you look at the bottom of page 114, there's these two possibilities of when Daniel was written. It's written during that historical experience, or it's written in the 2nd century BC. Either way, look at the top of page 115. In its own time, whether the stories were written then or looked back to then, the message of Daniel to the Jews who were being oppressed is one of assuring them that their troubles are not going to last forever. That Antiochus's mad, crazy, insane plans are not something that God's going to let come to fruition. And of course, to us today, whether it was written in the time in which it was set or written later, the message is we have a God who's still in control of history. And notice this second sentence, life in fellowship with God does not guarantee security and ease. Remember these post-Deuteronomic texts that we've looked at in the post-exilic time. Some of those Deuteronomic texts seem to suggest if you live good, God's going to give you good. And now we're reading some of these texts that are saying, there's something more to this. But what it does do, let's just read that for today together. For today, God is still in control of history. Life in fellowship with God does not guarantee security and ease. It guarantees only the opportunity to be faithful to that God who in grace makes his people his eternal children. The faithful can expect opposition from those around them in the world, and passages in Matthew. However, when the world does its worst to them, all is well. They always rank among the blessed and are most precious to God. Nothing can separate God's people from his love and fellowship in time and eternity. So you might want to put a circle or star around that. The other thing that's interesting, and we'll close with this, is that last little section, canon, canon, is a word that's used to describe what is accepted into the Bible, both Old Testament and New, done separately. Okay, so the New Testament canon is only those 27 books that we have. The Hebrew Bible has only these 39 books. And what's interesting is what books were going to be included in the Hebrew Bible and what books were going to be left out. That discussion continued during Jesus's lifetime, beyond the apostles' lifetime, and was only toward the close of the 1st century AD in this place called Jamnia. And Daniel was placed in the writings, not the prophets. The prophetic section was already closed and complete as early as 200 BC. And so at Jamnia, they only talked about that third and final section of the Hebrew scriptures. Still today, Jewish people will divide their Bible into 3 groups: the law, the prophets, and the writings. The law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Isaiah through Malachi, but not counting Ruth, Lamentation, and Daniel. Those are part of the writings. All the other books that we have in what we call our Old Testament is there. And it's interesting. Daniel was not known or quoted until about 160 BC. But we have evidence that it was known and quoted after that time. Considerations of literary style, vocabulary indicate a later date. Who knows? This is just part of the conversation and discussion. But what we do know is that Daniel's included in the writings.
It's like Daniel would have had to be mega old with all the kings that he's.
Well, right, that's another one of the historical challenges is that, how likely is it? Again, you don't want to, our human logic doesn't always determine how God works, right? But you do get this sense that, would really 3 successive dynasties that were different people ruling a territory continue to elevate to power someone who had been there before? Again, we don't know for sure, but let's join in these prayers. And this was a particularly long and sometimes challenging lesson. But let's pray. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. If you will look briefly at the information on chapter 39. Again, these writings were started to be written 200 BC all the way through AD 100. And we're just going to be looking at some of them. Turn to page 124. These are writings that are included in the Roman Catholic Old Testament. So if you have a copy of a Roman Catholic Bible, you would be able to find these, or they're referred to as the Apocrypha. And so some Protestant Bibles include them after the Old Testament, but before the New Testament, in between. So you may want to check to see if those are available. And then you also have a whole bunch of other writings that occur. So we're just going to be kind of going through your book primarily next time, so that you're just aware of that. You may not have a lot to read, although you can look at the question sheets and see. And then in the final unit of this section, we're going to kind of bring all this stuff together and say, how did all this affect the way in which people, New Testament times, what were they thinking? What were they experiencing? What was in their mindset? What kinds of views did they have? And then 3 lessons from now, we're finally getting into the New Testament. So keep at it, and we will